year. So I will turn it over to you now, Christen.
Awesome. All right. Thanks so much, Jenny. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today and just chat with everybody about taking care of the caregivers that are there for the OCD sufferers and just any of our clients that may be struggling with anxiety. So give me a minute. I'm going to go through like making sure I'm hitting everything correctly. So what we want to cover today is really learning about OCD caregivers. Who are they? What are they doing? Learning about the accommodations that are typically present and why and how those contribute to burnout. And then helping the caregiver, if you're treating the family member or loved one of someone who has OCD, really helping them understand the patterns of that are present with a lack of self-care, but also like types of self-care that they can slowly start ramping up in their lives. And also learning about self-compassion, which I think is always very, like, we can just feel like we can put that across the board for everyone. We all need it. So let's talk about what a caregiver is. So in life, we all end up in moments where we may be engaging in just functional caregiving, right? This can be part of relationships, helping people when they're sick, taking care of a loved one if they're injured, or if they're just really busy, part of this like give and take that can exist inside of relationships. And very typically what we see is that caregivers are often parents, siblings, spouses, children, or friends of someone who is just having a rough moment or needs some assistance. And functional caregiving and the OCD caregiver, actually both functional caregivers and OCD caregivers, can engage in very similar tasks. They look almost like the same thing. But what we want to look at is what is the function of what that individual caregiver is doing and why are they doing it? So when it comes to OCD, we often see that maladaptive caregiving, or what we call accommodating. And that's just really helping the caregiver, perform rituals or engage in any avoidance that may prevent them from being in contact with a trigger. So let's talk about why this happens. Very typically, some caregiver challenges are simply the unknown. So not just the caregiver not knowing what's going on, but often the sufferer. It takes time still to get diagnosed with OCD and to understand the full complexity of what's going on. One of the other common caregiver challenges is that it's our natural inclination as human beings to want to alleviate suffering. When we see somebody hurting, we want to help them. And so very often we've never heard the word accommodations or accommodating, or we start simply off on the right foot wanting to help someone, not understanding that that journey is going to take us somewhere else. So here's the other thing about the unknown. OCD is still an incredibly debilitating disorder. 1 in 200 children, 1 in 100 adults. From the latest research that I was able to locate, about 50% of cases with OCD fall into the severe range. And it's not uncommon to have a lot of accommodations across the board, severe or not. In fact, the data that I was able to dig up said that current estimates are that somewhere between 62 and 100% of OCD sufferers are receiving accommodations. And part of that, again, I would just go back to, it's our natural inclination as humans to want to alleviate the distress of others. We want to help. We don't like seeing people that we care about in pain or discomfort. So what ends up typically happening is this pattern of burnout. And we see this actually in just the caregiver world, period, whether you're helping somebody and caring for someone who has OCD, or you're in a caregiver role. Caregivers often feel mentally exhausted. This is how we know we've passed the point of healthy caregiving, feeling exhausted, often feeling irritable and frustrated with the other person. that negative feeling towards someone that you care about. And we just struggle with understanding, like, why is this so annoying? I care about them. And feeling disconnected from others. When we're investing a lot of time in caring for someone else and also trying to maintain our own lives, if that's work or hobbies, or usually it's not hobbies, often we're going to have this time period where we feel disconnected because we're not investing in the self, right? So when caregivers come in, it's important to assess not only the accommodations, which we'll talk about in a minute, but also, are they even able to care for themselves? Is there anything going on? If I would say, like, regardless of the sufferer being a family member, there will be added difficulty and stress on the relationship because the focus of the relationship has shifted. And we want to help those caregivers work on shifting it back to investing in that person and learning how to not invest in the OCD. Caregiver burnout means that there's a disruption in the social life, typically an increase in the self-criticism. People are being pulled into an increasing number of rituals and avoidances over time. And caregivers very often suffer from depression. They're struggling with that persistent low mood, loss of pleasure, inability to concentrate. We're tired all the time, sleeping too much, too little. And again, this just slow chip away at things that are good for them, right? They're not eating well, and just an overall decrease in their quality of life. So we see that as OCD continues to get worse, the need for accommodations escalates. So it's demanding more and more and more of that caregiver. And so over time, typically what we should see is that person losing more and more of their quality of life and the part of their life that is about them. I've seen similar patterns in families where we have a depressed individual, where we see like temporary changes, or, I've definitely seen the parents before who, made a lot of changes for depressed adolescents. And now sometime later, the adolescent is, where they were like, yes, play, spend time with friends, maybe play a little extra video games, whatever. Now we're seeing like, well, they're happier, only like we're still doing a lot of things that are probably not great right now. So let's talk to the caregivers about why they're burning out. A lot of times this is because we have an idea about what it means to be that good person, good parent, good sibling. This is what a good human does, right? We help people feel better. And so correcting that distortion about, yeah, our intent was great, it was good, this started out in the right place, and moving over to where we help them understand, really sometimes that actually means we're being good to the OCD, and that contributes to our frustration as well. Helping them understand that crisis after crisis after crisis can build up over a long period of time, and we make exceptions for things. We slowly lose ourselves. It's not just we wake up one day in the state where we're accommodating OCD all the time and we're angry at our loved ones. But this is a slow process going in, and it's going to be a slow process coming out. And so those small compromises going in, fine. We just want to make small changes moving out as well. So setting up a successful plan with the caregiver about how to get back to their lives. That the accommodations are likely taking up more time and energy and effort in their lives than they realize. What I have seen sort of repeatedly working with families is, that very often they come in and they know sort of like, oh, these are the lists of accommodations that we're doing. And when educated more about accommodations, they kind of leave and they come back and they go, wow, we didn't realize that we were also doing these smaller things over here. And so just make like, yeah, that's a huge part of your life, and helping them make that shift. And then again, just kind of educating them on what accommodations are and helping them determine where can we help the person and where is maybe a normal life accommodation appropriate and where is that accommodating the OCD. And treatment has got to include aspects of addressing those accommodations. It's treating the full system. So I know that Ellie Leibowitz has a great training or a great program for parents of OCD and anxiety kiddos. And it's fantastic. And he talks about addressing that in a different way, as opposed to just treating the kids, that we're working on addressing what's going on with the parents. So let's look at what accommodations are. So accommodations are caregiver support specifically related to OCD symptoms, right? So again, I think often there can be some confusion about how to help somebody as they go through treatment and ways to really address the accommodations that are like part of the OCD system and those that are just a part of being a living human being. So educating the loved one or the caregiver on helping the sufferer and hurting the sufferer versus hurting the OCD and helping the OCD, and really clarifying all of those labels. And therapeutic work really shouldn't focus on also being consistent. I don't know about anybody else in here, but there are some things I'm great about being consistent on, like no questions, no discussions. And then there are other things that I just stink at it. But I know myself well enough to set up systems that can help me be more consistent, especially in areas that are important to me and that I'm trying to work towards getting better or moving in that value-driven direction. And so helping those caregivers really kind of carve out that information for them. And then as a treatment provider, making sure that we're picking reasonable targets. You know, it's not uncommon to see people who are struggling, who come in, they learn about something, or they've watched a video or they've read something on the IOCDF website and they are going to implement it right now today. And so they try and it falls apart or it blows up or it works for like a hot minute and then it's gone. But making sure that we really help them identify reasonable targets. And again, like re-emphasizing, we did not wake up yesterday and everything was in the spot. It was a slow progression to this point. And so we're going to consistently work in the other direction. And that means decreasing accommodations, learning how to take care of yourself again, and maybe learning how to take care of yourself for the first time ever in a different way. And then also learning how to change our internal language that maybe has taken a more of a negative critical turn now that we are in the accommodating cycle. The last thing I want to talk about is communication. Communication is so important. And I know we all know that. I definitely see this, often the communication is very like curt and frustrated when it comes to caregivers and the OCD sufferers. And so encouraging the caregivers to return to a place of expressing their concern for the sufferer. I care about you. I love you. You are so important to me. You know what's not important to me? The OCD. I don't like it. I don't like what it does to you. I don't like that you have to feel this way. And learning how to express and communicate maybe goals that the caregiver is working on themselves. So, because I care about you so much, I'm no longer going to fill in the blank, in 2 weeks. This is when I'm starting this because I care about you. And I know this is hard. And I think this is kind of taking something from Ellie Leibowitz, I know this is hard and I know you can do it, right? So I always talk to parents about cheerleading their sufferers, and spouses, like, we want to cheerlead. You can do this. I believe in you, right? I know this is hard, but we don't want to tell them everything's going to be okay. I've never heard that cheer at a football game. Everything's going to be all right. Like, I just don't hear that one. But I definitely hear, like, we can still go, we can still fight, we can still win. So working on that communication is absolutely key. So let's talk about self-care. And self-care and self-compassion, I'm going to say this multiple times, are kind of like one of my favorite topics to introduce, because I love seeing people's reactions to things like, oh, really? Like, self-care, okay. Like, I knew you were going to bring up the real therapy thing sooner or later, and here we are. So we'll start out with self-care. A lot of times it's hard for people to tell what they need, and because it looks so different for every single person. And so I've gathered just a few pieces, like one or two definitions that really, really struck me as kind of a great description. That self-care is anything that you do for yourself that feels nourishing. And I would say, I like to tell people, it restores you to the core of your being. It doesn't, you don't feel more empty, you don't feel more drained, you feel restored. And then another one says like, it can be something that's relaxing or calming, or it can be something that is intellectual or spiritual or physical or practical. And again, whatever is restoring for you. I often have people tell me that they will not be taking a bath. Like, that is awesome. They can't stand taking a bath. I'm like, that's great. That's disgusting. They've read the articles, they've seen the things, and that is not them. I'm like, great. Doesn't have to be you. It's anything that you find restoring. So here's why it's important for caregivers. Most of the time, caregivers are beyond empty. They are so drained. They have forgotten how to check in on themselves, or they never have. A lot of times we don't have not most people, but a lot of people don't have regular self-care items in their lives. Like, they just don't have a schedule. They'll do one here, and then 4 months later, they'll do another one. And self-care doesn't work because I did 2 things this year, and here I am. I'm fine. And we just need to reinforce how important it is. And so I love telling people things like self-care is directly related to reductions in stress. Yeah, who couldn't use that on an average day? Improved immunity, increased productivity, and higher levels of self-esteem. Like, these are all fantastic things, or I think so. And there's a direct link in decreasing our relational stress. When we learn to move the focus and help caregivers move that focus from the OCD off to other things, including self-care, they're refreshed, they have more energy to help fight the OCD. So it decreases that distress. Then all of our interactions with that loved one are not focused on the OCD, or I'm frustrated because I have to do this thing for you again. And then I feel bad later because I was rude to you and I don't want to be that way. So it really helps break down that cycle. And it gives the caregiver a break. They need a break. We all need a break. Self-care is so important. So I'm going to go into different types of self-care, but I thought we'd talk about like some things, some extra checks. What do I really need, both mentally and physically, right? Like, listen, this stuff needs to refresh you to the core of your being. And it may have been a long time since that's happened. And so ways to think about that are like, what do I need? When do I feel good? When did I feel good in the past mentally? When did I feel good in the past physically? There may be some things that are great. They were 10 years ago, and now they're just not for you. But when you try it out again, how do you feel afterwards? Do you feel great? Do you feel extra drained? That feels amazing because you've gotten to do something. And making sure, again, we're taking breaks, making time for the self regularly. And this is going to be important, not just for self-care, but also self-compassion, because we need to keep implementing those skills over and over and over to combat a lot of things that are just present in our lives and that have been for too long, like a negative bias. And then implementing things that simplify daily chores. We're going to see that on the list next, but just ultimately encouraging people to find balance. So here are, 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 3. Here are 6 different types of self-care. Now, I have put some suggestions under each column. And these are, if you are a caregiver, these are by no means the ones that you have to choose. But let's talk about emotional self-care. These are actions that we take to connect with our emotions and process them in some healthy way, a functional way. Journaling. Journaling is something that is absolutely amazing. And some people, that is their thing. That is not my jam, right? So I am not going to sit down and journal. But talking with a therapist, that sounds fantastic. I will do that. I am a verbal processor, right? Or chatting with my friend to process through something. Mindfulness. Practicing gratitude, right? Here we are in the month of Thanksgiving that we should all be grateful for, right? We hear more about gratitude typically in November than other times, but really implementing a consistent practice of gratitude and just trying something new. I put on there new hobbies. Try something new that you've never tried before. Go to a class. You don't have to purchase every single thing that you need to, start glass blowing, but you can go to a glass blowing class and try it out. So then we have physical self-care. Y'all, we have to move our bodies, and helping caregivers learn that, getting up and going through their daily routine is not always self-care. But going for a 5-minute walk, getting up and walking down the hallway when you're at work and coming back, taking a nap, a brief nap, massages, attending neglected medical appointments, which no one ever does. We never skip those things, right? Spiritual self-care. So, and I mean this both in like just the sense of spiritual self, but also the religious spiritual self. Some people need to refill. They need to, again, like take a walk, go outside. There are a few places here in Houston that I love to go walking. One of them is the Arboretum, because it's outside. It's so pretty. It's fantastic. Memorial Park, it's a break. We're moving away from the concrete jungle and into a space where I can just reconnect. Volunteer. Go on an electronics fast. Step away, unplug. Practical self-care, this is one of my favorites. This is a great area to just strategize about how to help that caregiver get some time back. Meal delivery service, cleaning service. Oh, you can drop off your sloths at the laundry or the dry cleaner. I probably meant clothes, but if you want to drop your sloths off at the dry cleaner, I'm sure they'll enjoy the change, right? Or simply scheduling 15 minutes every day for that person to invest in their own personal living space. Set a timer, 7 to 7:15. I'm going to spend 15 minutes making my personal living space more enjoyable. Professional self-care. Y'all, bring some water to the office. Set a water goal. Set a reminder to get up from your desk. Set a limit on checking your email and returning phone calls, and set a boundary about when we're leaving work and when we're going to work. And then social self-care. Scheduling phone calls with friends, family, whoever you need. On Mondays, I call mom. On Tuesdays, I call my friend Tisha because she's the one with the name that starts with T. But just having something significant that refreshes that caregiver. So let's talk about guilt, because guilt is going to show up. Guilt is a fantastic emotion when we've done something wrong. But when we are caregivers, guilt often shows up to tell us, hey, you're doing something wrong, when we have not. And so helping that caregiver learn how to evaluate that message. hey, is this an effective message for me? I feel guilty and bad, like I've done something wrong. Have I? I see a lot of guilt with caregivers, especially with moms, that it's like a social trend that we all self-sacrifice. And that if you're taking care of yourself before you take care of your child, something's wrong with you. And so I think one of the things that I will say is, again, like multiple times, if you're empty, if you're on E, you cannot fill someone else up and you can't take care of them. So when we feel guilty for taking care of ourselves, we want to engage in utilizing a lot of the self-compassion techniques when we talk to ourselves. So let's talk about what self-compassion is. Self-compassion is turning compassion inwards. So a message that we often have no problem sending to other people, we would just about roll over and I don't know, I don't want to say die, that's not a good one, but we would just rather be nice to other people than ourselves. We'll go out of our way to express compassion and support for another human and then criticize ourselves for the exact same thing. Luckily, self-compassion, like self-care, is linked with mental health, good mental health, and physical well-being. And today I'm going to actually talk about not only the 3 common parts of self-compassion that we all know, but their other friends. So we're going to call those mindfulness, common humanity, and self-kindness, the yin. We're going to talk about fierce self-compassion as the yang. So Christen, you all hopefully know, is the guru of self-compassion, says that the 3 components of self-compassion that are mindfulness, common humanity, and self-kindness can show up as fierce empowered truth, and that this is fierce self-compassion. And this is fantastic because all too often when discussing or introducing self-compassion, again, I've seen clients like roll their eyes like, oh, here comes I knew it was going to happen. Are you going to ask me how I feel next? Like, how do I feel about that? But with fierce self-compassion, it just feels like something solid that we can stand on, along with the components of self-compassion. I feel like it really gives us a full picture of what we need. So let's talk about mindfulness. John Kabat-Zinn says, mindfulness is the awareness that arises through paying attention on purpose, in the present moment, non-judgmentally. So not getting caught up in our negative thoughts or guilt feelings, but rather taking a balanced approach and noticing them without buying into them. And we need to be able to have whatever we're having in order to do something about it. So when we're working with clients on mindfulness, we can work by teaching and practicing mindfulness in session, learning. There are tons of exercises. I love, like, YouTube can be a great resource and also a terrible resource, but there are tons of resources available. Going through scripts with clients, helping them record something, or even utilizing apps. There are more and more and more apps available. So when we practice mindfulness, mindfulness really manifests for each individual when they clearly see the truth. When we no longer avoid the truth of our situations because we're withholding out of fear or discomfort, and which means we're judging our own experiences, we're unable to be fully present. So with fierce mindfulness, we hold our pain with fierce empowered truth, we can speak up about it and tell our stories to protect not only ourselves, but help and prevent others from being harmed. And this also ties in with that component of common humanity, right? Which I'm going to go right into. Common humanity is understanding that we aren't supposed to be perfect, no matter how much we want to. In fact, no one is. And I think this is one of those things where people are like, absolutely, no one else should be perfect. It's not okay for me not to be perfect, though. Like, I need to be without fault so that I don't have any criticism because I'm so scared of being that person. Where my negative evaluation of self is all of a sudden I'm hearing that from other people. That sounds terrifying. But this is where we often can work on the acceptance that we apply to others, kind of looping ourselves in and reminding ourselves that we are part of a bigger community. So with fierce self-compassion, we're going to recognize not only that we are not alone, but that we don't need to hang our heads in shame. We have done something that maybe we're not proud of or isn't part of our value system, but this is part of being human. And when we do that, when we're able to connect to that common humanity, we can feel more empowered, and we can even feel more empowered about making a change. And when we recognize our common humanity, or ways that I try to encourage caregivers to recognize their common humanity, is absolutely, going to like the IOCDF's conference. It's fantastic. There are other people like you. There are other people who are struggling and can relate directly to what you're saying, what you're experiencing, and the struggles that you have. And I love that we have the online camps. We have so many more options now. We have chat rooms online. There are so many ways to connect with other caregivers who feel burnt out, who are struggling to not only take care of themselves, but also cross the bridge of like, how do I really follow through with helping my loved one who's suffering so much? And so support groups are big. If you guys have a support group, if you don't, love OCD Texas, they have resources on their website. There are resources on the IOCDF website. There are constantly ways to connect. Like I know there are even Reddit conversations now about all kinds of things having to do with OCD. And when I hear clients and caregivers come in with that type of information, they're like, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. Someone else, right? Not a professional who wrote a book, or not my therapist who knows all this stuff, which is great, but another human who's a sufferer, took words out of my own head and put them on the internet. It was fantastic. So really helping them learn how to connect with that common humanity. Now we're going to talk about self-kindness. Self-kindness is where we're going to encourage the caregivers to soothe and comfort themselves when they are in pain, when they are struggling, being warm, being kind, that we don't ignore our pain. We don't skip over it. We want to look at it and acknowledge it and recognize it as being part of the human experience. We want to be mindful about it and reminding ourselves that everyone has experiences like this. When we skip this aspect of self-kindness, or when we skip the aspect of self-kindness within self-compassion, caregivers and sufferers inadvertently increase their own suffering because they're engaging in self-criticism. And I describe self-criticism as sort of like the undertow in the ocean and in water. Like we go in, we think everything's fine, and then slowly over time, we're pulled under. And it slowly chips away at our not just our humanity, but like our ability to recognize within ourselves that we are okay. And I mean that globally in the human sense. Fierce self-compassion means that we stand up for ourselves. We advocate for ourselves. We set boundaries for ourselves. We engage in self-care because we need it. We don't accommodate OCD, and we work with somebody to decrease those accommodations because we care about ourselves and we care about the sufferer. We say no because no is okay to say. No matter how stressed out somebody else is, it's okay. So fierce kindness. Oops, nope. All right, so lastly, I just want to discuss some of the very common pitfalls and obstacles that tend to come up with self-compassion. The first one is we might believe that we are just unworthy of that type of love. Everyone else is, but not me. I can tell everyone else that it's okay to fail and have hiccups and not do well or mess up. And that's great. And I absolutely believe that's true. But when it comes to it being okay for me, I just don't feel it. And those types of messages can be around for so long. They can start when we're so young that we don't even recognize that those are part of the undertow that's slowly pulling us under. And so really focusing when you're working with a caregiver on those types of things, that slow undertow of unworthiness of love and kindness. As humans, we are hardwired with a negative bias, right? And this means that we are tuned in to our failures and mistakes. And we're tuned in a way that is most of the time not with love and compassion and understanding, but with a sharp criticism. And we do that often with the intent and focus of how do I never, ever make this mistake again, right? Or often I have people say like, well, it was okay the first time, but any other repeated mistakes, not okay. So I can have compassion and kindness and understanding, and I can be mindfully present with my pain the first time. And then after that, all bets are off because you can only make a mistake once. I think that's amazing that people have this idea that we can be that like a computer program. Like I'll just go back in and fix the programming and make sure the mistake never happens again. When we ask them like how other people are, if that's okay for other people to make the mistake multiple times, oh yeah, for sure, that's fine, but not me. So being aware of that negative bias to get into that place of like, I'm good, but never again. The other one is not checking in. I think one of the best things about kind of pandemic life was it felt like the entire world that was overscheduled and stressed out 5 to 7 days a week just came to a screeching halt. And all of a sudden, people had room for hobbies and things that they had not tried in years, right? You could not get a sewing machine to save your life. You could not get a bicycle. Those things were here before, but all of a sudden everyone slowed down. And what I'm seeing again is this kind of like almost this immediate ramp up back to where we were pre-pandemic life. I see a mixture of ages, but I'm seeing, the adolescents and kiddos scheduled again, their schedules filling up. School's back in person, they're at school all day, followed by tutoring and or a sport and or the piano lesson and or yada, and it's just filling up and people are struggling because we really benefited from that slowdown. And so when we slowed down, people got a chance to check in and go like, oh my gosh, what have I been doing? Another thing that I saw during the pandemic was also like this real excitement about working from home, like, yay, business on top, pajamas on the bottom, like, woohoo. And people doing a great job of like, I'm at work from 8 to 5 and I get an hour lunch break. This is great. And then slowly work sort of like bleeding out into the rest of the day. So like, oh yeah, I got up at 6 and I just turned on my work computer and turned the chat on and just slowly eating up time. And so again, kind of filling things up where we weren't checking in. So it's not uncommon to be on autopilot, but really helping that caregiver get off autopilot. And I think it can be difficult when we turn autopilot off as a caregiver and we hear things like accommodation, that word, and we really understand that, oh my gosh, this whole time I thought I was doing something that was really helpful. And you mean I was hurting the person that I care about? But implementing that regular check-in, educating, yes, it's okay. We did it out of love and care for that person. but this is why we need to check in. This is why self-care is important. This is why self-compassion is important. The other obstacle are just negative beliefs about self-compassion, right? If I treat myself this way, I'll be self-indulgent. So I need to be really rough on myself to make sure that I'm fine. And reminding sufferers and caregivers that self-compassion is about moving towards things that matter, moving towards the things that they value, and getting rid of the things that were obstacles in their journey, and helping them move towards their value-driven life. Where do you want to be? Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? What do you want your life to look like? The last one are just positive beliefs about self-criticism, because we all know that self-criticism is just amazing. It's fantastic. It does so many great things for us. And it doesn't, but it's hard to turn off that belief a lot of times, because we really are invested in ideas like, if I'm not hard on myself, I'm not winning any battles. People who are hard on themselves, those people just don't get anywhere. And working on addressing those beliefs that caregivers and sufferers can have. All right, so on the last slide, I just have some resources for everybody to check out. I got to review some great things, and it was super amazing being here today. I see that we have